Good morning, everyone. Sometimes when I'm getting ready for our studies together and our Bible lessons or in our sermons, I have an idea of what I want to talk about, like a theme or a topic, and I go looking for passages like that. Other times I take a look at individual people and try and create a profile of them that helps us to learn something about what we are to learn about our Christian walk and our relationship with God. And last week was more of the second one when we talked about Mary Magdalene. And I sort of unintentionally started a series here because I've got another woman in the Bible for our lesson today. We'll be looking at Judges chapter 4. So if you'd like to turn to Judges chapter 4, we'll be looking at the story of one of the judges there. Her name is Deborah. If you want to be really Hebrew about it, you could call her Deborah, but I think we'll stick with the English pronunciation for the purposes of this lesson. We'll say also in Judges chapter 4, as we look at Deborah here, her name is kind of interesting. It's a lot more syllables for the term than we have in English. If you translated her name, it would be bee, as in the things that make honey. So it's a lot simpler sort of a name in English, like I said. But there's three interesting names in this chapter as well. The man who comes to seek her advice here, we'll see in the story as we look at these characters. The man's name is Barak, which means lightning. And there's another woman at the end of the chapter who becomes famous, and her name is also an animal, much like Deborah's, except this is an ibex, which is a kind of antelope-looking critter that lives in the mountains. Has big long horns. Maybe you've seen one before in a picture. But anyway, Deborah is our main focus for today, and she's the example we'll be learning from. Her job is, as you may guess from being in the book of Judges, a judge. That is the role that she takes on. But she's also a prophet and has the role of someone who speaks on behalf of God. And so with this dual purpose, she has a lot of responsibility on her hands, and therefore is a very important person in the nation of Israel at this time. And she's going to have both of those roles put to use in the passage we'll look at. Let's just start with chapter 4 and verse 1 and go from there. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, now that Ehud was dead. So the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, the king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. Sisera, the commander of his army, was based in Hasharoth-Hagoyim. Because he had 900 chariots fitted with iron and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years, they cried to the Lord for help. Now Deborah, a prophet, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at the time. She held court at the Palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites went up to her to have their disputes decided. She sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go, take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, and lead them up to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River, and give him to your hands." Okay, so we see a prophecy here that she delivers, and she is putting this army together under the command of Barak to go and eliminate this this oppressor that has been keeping the Israelite people under the thumb of the king of Canaan here. You may notice also the location of this. This is she's in the region that we would call maybe not the typical area that a lot of the leadership that we think of from the Israelites takes place. I mean, Joshua crosses over the Jordan River, and they begin to do the conquering of the land there. And a lot of it is that sort of early judge history takes place in the southern part of the kingdom here. And now we're in the hill country of Ephraim for the purposes of this story, at least where it's starting. And also, when you're thinking about leaders of Israel, having a woman who's in the role of a judge and a prophet may not be the first kind of leader you think of. If I tell you to think of a leader of Israel, you might go to Moses, you might go all the way back to, the original Hebrew himself, Abraham, and you might think of kings like David and so forth. But Deborah has a particular role to play here, and there's something for us to learn. Well, the first thing that I think is worth talking about is what exactly a judge is. If I tell you somebody's a judge now, you know what that means. They wear the little black robe, they sit on the bench, they have the gavel, and they tell you whether or not you have to, pay your parking ticket or whatever. The role of a judge at this time was completely different. There's probably a better word for it than judge, actually, but there's not exactly one that I could think of that encompassed everything that a judge does without just being really vague. You could just call them leaders, because the judges indeed did judge, but as you can see from this point where she's giving military orders and she's commanding that a general essentially put together an army, it's not exactly the same thing as someone just deciding who's right or wrong in the sight of the law. She's also not purely a general either, right? She holds court essentially at this place called the Palm of Deborah. People come to her for advice, and she will make judgments on decisions that need to be made. You could maybe say, if you're going to give her a role, something like a tribal chief or a tribal elder or leader in that respect. Just using the word leader is a little too vague, and some of these other words are a little too sort of loaded in one direction or another. But saying judge doesn't really quite encompass everything either. So I just thought it was worth pointing out what's actually going on here. She's got a very big job to do. She is the singular leader for the people at this time. She's also a prophet, or maybe we could say prophetess if we want to use that term. The idea being a prophet is the idea of anyone who speaks on behalf of God. God supernaturally intervenes, gives them a word, and then she has to exposit that to the people. And so she's been given this role where the Lord has communicated through her that it's time to save the people from this oppression that they've been under at this point. It is also worth pointing out, while we're on the subject of prophets and prophetesses, not all of our judges are prophets. They don't all have this sort of dual purpose. They do all get called by God to do the job of being a prophet, doing the job of being a judge, but not all of them speak to him directly. Not all of them have that sort of role as a prophet and a judge. Okay, so she calls up Barak and gives him this job. Take 10,000 men from the Naphtali and Zebulun peoples and go and we'll defeat Sisera. The Lord will give you victory over this oppressor who is described in some really fearsome terms, right? The way that Sisera is armed, he has 900 chariots fitted with iron. And that might not sound like much in modern military equipment terms, but if you're having mostly an infantry, offensive or defensive force, and somebody's got these cavalry units like a chariot, that's something to be feared, because you seriously got some overwhelming firepower, so to speak. Starting in verse 8, though, we're going to see Barak's response. And it may not be what you expect. Barak said to her, "If you go with me, I will go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go." Well, first of all, we could talk a little bit about his lack of faith. What happened? The Lord says, "Take this army and I'm going to give you victory." But Barak doesn't show a lot of faith and trust in the Lord right here, right? He says, "Well, the Lord might have said that, but I want you to go with me, Deborah. I trust you, not so much the Lord, but you're on my side, we can win." So it says a lot about his faith in her and his understanding of her wisdom and her ability to guide him to victory. But it does say a little bit about his weakness of faith, that he can't just trust the Lord to get the victory. And because of this, the Lord gives a extra level of humility to Barak over the situation. Now, God still wants to be victorious, and he still wants his people to win in this situation, but how that victory takes place changes because of his lack of faith. All right, in verse 9, Deborah responds to Barak. Certainly, I will go with you," said Deborah, "but because of the course you are taking, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera to the hands of a woman." So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh. There Barak summoned Zebulun and Naphtali, and 10,000 men went up under his command. Deborah also went up with him. Now Heber the Kenite had left the other Kenites, the descendants of Hobab, Moses' brother-in-law, and pitched his tent by the great tree in Zananim near Kadesh. When they told Sisera that Barak son of Abinoam had gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera summoned from Harosheth Hagoyim to the Kishon River all his men and his 900 chariots fitted with iron. Okay, so this is where we are at this point. Barak simply going up to get this command from Deborah that we're going to go defeat the Canaanites was enough for him to start getting his army together. He already knows, oh, okay, well, if he's on the move, if the general is going up to get the commands from the leader, then we know what we're going to have to get ready and get in a defensive position. So that already tells you that they are somewhat aware of the power of the Lord and what these people could do given the situation being on their side. And so they're putting up a defense. They're mustering their army. And at the same time, we've been introduced to this character of Heber the Kenite and where his tent is. So he's going to be near Kadesh, and Sisera goes and gets his army, and he's going to rally them in this same general region where this guy Heber the Kenite is located. And now we're going to see why that matters in verse 14 and following. Then Deborah said to Barak, "Go, this is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you?" So Barak went down Mount Tabor, with 10,000 men following him. At Barak's advance, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and army by the sword, and Sisera got down from his chariot and fled on foot. So just again, Sisera went and got all of his men. It doesn't specify how many men that is in verse 13, but he also got his iron chariots, or his chariots fitted with iron, and brings them to set up this defensive posture. But as this army of 10,000 men bears down on them, they break formation, they start to scatter. And it's so bad that the commander of the army, Sisera, doesn't have a path out. He doesn't have a way to get himself away from the command structure and off the front lines and away, right? And so rather than get crushed and hemmed in and get captured by the foreign army or killed by this army, Sisera just gets down from the chariot and runs. And you'd have to imagine how bad is the battlefield situation that you can't turn the chariot one direction or another and get the horses going and get yourself out of the crowd. You've got to actually just get down on foot and push your way through the bodies to get your way to safety. That's what's going on here. That's how bad of a situation he's been put in, how badly they've been routed. So, here we go. Verse 16. Barak pursued the chariots and army as far as Harosheth-Hagoyim, and all Sisera's troops fell by the sword. Not a man was left. Sisera, meanwhile, fled on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, because there was an alliance between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the family of Heber the Kenite. Okay, so this Sisera thinks he's got a refuge here. So he goes and he visits this tent and to try and find a way to avoid the inevitable here, that the Israelite army is going to come and eliminate him and all of his men. So he comes to Jael's tent and finds her there. Verse 18. Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Come, my lord, come right in. Don't be afraid." So he entered her tent, and she covered him with a blanket. "I'm thirsty," he said. "Please give me some water." She opened a skin of milk, gave him a drink, and covered him up. "Stand in the doorway of the tent," he told her. "If someone comes by and asks you, 'Is anyone in there?' say no." But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quickly to him while he lay fast asleep, exhausted. She drove the peg through his temple into the ground, and he died. Just then Barak came by in pursuit of Sisera, and Jael went out to meet him. "Come," she said, "I will show you the man you're looking for." So he went in with her, and there lay Sisera with the tent peg through his temple, dead. On that day God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, before the Israelites, and the hand of the Israelites pressed harder and harder against Jabin, king of Canaan. I don't know where that came from, until they destroyed him. Okay. So, it's interesting. What did Deborah say before this battle started? She told Barak very clearly, "Because you asked me to go with you, the glory will not be given to you, but to a woman." Was that woman Deborah? It was Jael who gets the glory for that victory. Now, Deborah certainly has some honor of her own. She is the leader of the people. She's their spiritual leader as well as their, political and military leader in this case. And it's interesting because we see just in the very next chapter that she's a poet as well as a warrior and a leader and all these other things. She and Barak composed this song together, and we'll look at a short passage from it here in a moment. But the main thing I want us to take away here is that she is demonstrating godly leadership for us in a way that we can really yearn for and look for and try to find examples of in our current era. I'd like to be able to say that I can very strongly confirm there is someone who is wise and spiritually sound and someone who has this creative spirit to be able to write a song and extol the virtues of God's mercies and his power on the side of the people to overcome oppression and to free them from the hand of those who would keep them down. But I'm not sure I can think of any examples of somebody who fits the pattern that this woman does here in our scripture. It's interesting, too, because if we're looking for that, part of the song that I mentioned a moment ago, the song from chapter 5, actually references something that I think fits this principle. Chapter 5 and verse 9 through 11 say the following. "My heart is with Israel's princes, with the willing volunteers among the people. Praise the Lord, you who ride on white donkeys, sitting on your saddle blankets, and you who walk along the road, consider the voice of the singers at the watering places. They recite the victories of the Lord, the victories of his villagers in Israel. Then the people of the Lord went down to the city gates." And then we get this, "Wake up, Deborah, wake up, break out in song. Arise, Barak, take your captive son of Abinoam." So the idea is that yes, there is the army, and they do bring the victory. But in this song, they don't let you forget who they are doing the fighting for or where they come from. You know, a lot of times in the passages that talk about and extol the victories and the conquests of the people of the Lord, it's true that they praise God, but they talk about God's martial prowess, God's ability to defeat people. But this passage has an interesting twist on that and an interesting take. Because who are the people who win in this victory? Who are the army that actually goes and does the fighting? It says specifically the victories of his villagers in Israel there in verse 10. They're not thought of as soldiers only, but the fact that they came from these towns and these places that they were going to protect. The point of it wasn't that they were militarily strong and mighty and warriors and valiant and all this stuff, but that they were standing up for the people back home. That was the point of being a warrior in this case. The ones who ride on the white donkeys sitting on the saddle blankets and walk along the roads, the ones going with Barak to fight in this battle, the reason that they're doing that is because of the singers at the watering places reciting the victories of the Lord. The point of the fight was, who is it that we're protecting? And that's why I think this particular leader here in Deborah is an important one. It helps us to understand and to ponder this question. What is the purpose of strength and what is the purpose of violence? Why do we sometimes need to use force? When is it sanctioned by the Lord? Well, it is sanctioned by the Lord when wisdom and mercy are imperiled, and when justice and peace are at risk, when innocent people are afraid to go out on the streets, because that was the problem, that people couldn't pass by on the roads because of Sisera's armies. They were going into the side roads, it says here in our song, that and in some of the passages surrounding this, that the people weren't able to just live an ordinary life. And so the Lord sent his leaders to go and to rescue those people from that kind of oppression. It wasn't just strength alone that was considered to be virtuous and valuable, but the people for whom that strength was honed and directed, that it was considered to be given a purpose. Verse 7 says it this way: villagers in Israel would not fight. They held back until I, Deborah, arose, until I arose, a mother in Israel. God chose new leaders when war came to the city gates, but not a shield or spear was seen among 40,000 in Israel. And that's when she says the part we read earlier: my heart is with Israel's princes, with the willing volunteers among the people. That the whole point of fighting was that there was a cause and a leader worth rallying behind in order to save the people who had been oppressed. So I want to bring this character up to you so that we could focus on her character qualities and her purpose in that time, and to use that as an example of the way God expects our leaders to behave today. Someone who listens to the word of God, someone who leads to protect those who are oppressed, and someone who is capable of not just destruction and thinking in these bleak and sort of militaristic or violent terms, but also someone who can sit down and sing a poem about their military victories and extol the virtues of the Lord's mercy in the process. We look for leaders who don't only heap glory upon themselves, but also lift up those who have the smallest of victories that end up making a big difference. It would have been really easy for the Lord to make Deborah the main character all the way through chapter 4. She could have been the one to drive the tent peg. But she didn't need that kind of glory. Instead, another woman was able to take the glory and to show what leadership meant in the moment when it mattered. And so even though this is kind of a violent story and not one that I hope we ever have to replicate in our individual lives, I think the character of Deborah and her heart and her wisdom are still so valuable for us and something we can learn very deeply from. I hope this lesson has been beneficial for you today and one that you can take encouragement from and look for examples of in our everyday lives as Christians. As we do every Sunday, we'd like to conclude by offering an opportunity now. If anyone needs to be baptized, if you need prayers for restoration or encouragement, if we could do anything to help you in any way, we'd invite you to come forward as we stand and sing.